record button now. So thank you very much, Vasilios, for those words of welcome. I'm going to introduce to you now, colleagues, Diana Hornby, who's going to be the main presenter in our webinar this afternoon. Di Hornby is the director of the Rhodes University Community Engagement Division, and she has been very involved in spearheading a very successful community engagement program here at our university. Rhodes University is about 170 years old now. It is the 6th oldest university in South Africa, and it is a research-intensive university and the only research-intensive situated in a, what shall we call it, a peri or a semi-rural area of the Eastern Cape in South Africa. And the Eastern Cape is one of the poorest provinces in the country. And apart from the fact that community engagement is one of the main purposes of higher education, along with teaching, learning, and research, community engagement is also particularly important in South Africa, that has a very big transformation agenda. And so Diana Hornby and the Community Engagement Division of Rhodes University they're all very important to the university's academic project. Di has asked me to please say that she's going to do a presentation, but she would very much like this presentation to be a stimulus for a dialogue afterwards, so that she is not the only person who's talking. And so she would very much, after her presentation, welcome questions and comments. Colleagues, we've got about 60 people in the room, and I am now going to hand over to Di Hornby, but can I just once again ask you to make sure that your microphone is muted at this time. Thank you very much, and Di, over to you.
Thank you, Joe, for the introduction, and greetings, colleagues. I'm especially pleased to be amongst the PUAT participating universities, locally and internationally. I'm hoping today's session will stimulate some dialogue around how we embed the SDGs in the work of higher education institutions. And I need to be upfront to say I'm not an expert in the SDGs, but I do recognize the immense value in having a shared vision and a collective response to global matters. The COVID-19 pandemic has shone a very blinding light on the 17 SDGs that we have not been able to ignore. So we have been working in our division quite a lot with the SDGs to embed them not only in our strategic plan, but also to infuse them in all the teaching, research, and community engagement that we are involved in. Joe, I'm having trouble moving the slides on. Is there anything that I'm doing wrong? There we go. Right, so the purpose of today's webinar is to stimulate discussion on the interdependent relationship between community engagement and teaching and learning in relation to the SDGs, as well as key elements of institutional and national development plans. So the presentation today will cover the following areas. At a macro level, we'll start with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs, and then we'll look at the SDGs and higher education. And when coming closer to home, we'll look at community engagement in South Africa, and then particular to our university and the Rhodes Community Engagement, which we call ROOS. And then we'll look at ROOS's community engagement framework, the theories and philosophies that underpin it. And then I'm going to share with you how we went about our strategic planning process to arrive at what we call the SDG wheel. And then I'm going to just give you a glimpse of one program that's run out of our division, which will give you a practical example of that nexus between teaching, research, and community engagement. And then I'm going to share some of the challenges. And then lastly, to ask the question of what do we do to effect transformation? Right, so let's start at the macro then, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's been adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015. It provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. As you well know, it comprises of the 17 interlinked Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call for action by all countries through a global partnership to end poverty, ensure prosperity, and to protect the planet. They recognize, the SDGs do, that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, spur economic growth while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. Now, a closer look at the SDG that impacts us as those working in higher education. The SDG 4, which is ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. So according to this SDG, higher education is an essential component of a strong and sustainable education system. Universities strengthen education policy and practice at all levels by training teachers and through educational research. Access to quality higher education continues to be an issue for women and girls, people with disabilities, those living in rural areas, people on lower incomes, Indigenous people, and those affected by conflict. Higher education develops the critical thinking and skills required by engaged citizens. So scholarships designed for development impact can also be used to promote equity and inclusion, reward merit, and deliver widespread access, especially to those from disadvantaged backgrounds, at the same time as addressing global challenges. And this was something I took out of UW and the University World News. And this bullet relates to something we do at Rhodes, which is called the Vice Chancellor's Education Initiative. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, because it highlights the role that higher education can play in the education system. So now we're going to look at SDGs and higher education. So higher education has a significant role to play in the development of every country. And the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development can only be achieved through partnerships. And I'm going to speak a lot about partnerships today. Partnerships that include universities, as indicated in the SDG 4, and in targets of other SDGs. For example, SDG 10, reduced inequalities, SDG 1, reducing poverty, 5, achieving gender equality, and then SDG 17, which will pop up as we go along, because it speaks to all the other SDGs. It's around partnership. working collectively for increased impact. These are not the only SDGs that higher education contributes, just a few examples. So we come to the question of why SDGs and higher education. So globalization interconnects local and global spaces. So pervasive problems, both local and global, can only be addressed through collaboration and cooperation between the state, civil society, and business. And of course, that includes higher education institutions. So combined efforts have to be harnessed to find solutions to many of these long, ongoing human problems. It's also necessary for higher education institutions to incorporate the SDGs into their strategic plans. And I'm going to show you how we've done that today. The SDGs require higher education institutions to assess how they engage with these goals and how they address societal issues and challenges through the functions of teaching and research and community engagement. So at an institutional level, the SDGs must be actioned through the strategic plan. Using Rhodes University as an example, in our institutional development plan, the reimagination of our university rests on 4 pillars. The one is sustainability, the second one, advancing social justice, the third one, advancing the public good, because that's the reason higher education exists. And then the fourth one is to be simultaneously locally responsive and globally engaged. So as our Vice Chancellor often says to us, our academic endeavor should seek to respond to the pressing and urgent local challenges while simultaneously contributing to our accumulated global stock of knowledge. So what it does, it actually allows us to enter the global knowledge system on our own terms, with knowledge of our own context, which I'm sure you'll all agree is important.
SDGs.
Continue with the SDGs in higher education. Research is the platform for universities to produce new knowledge and innovation that address these societal issues and challenges, and that inform public policy. Looking at teaching, it enables universities to develop generations of new leaders and skilled professionals who can contribute to social and economic development. That's one of the key reasons for the existence of higher education. And then the third point is through community engagement. Universities work with varied stakeholders, and that includes government, the private sector, and civil society to continue local, national, and global development as part of the institution's academic project. That third bullet speaks to partnerships, and partnerships are a critical part of implementing the SDGs, and you'll see that although it is SDG 17, it actually speaks to all the other SDGs. So higher education's engagement with SDGs are varied and influenced by institutional leadership, available resources, institutional resource allocation, student activism, and social and political imperatives. And I'm sure that rings true as you hear it. We have a Vice Chancellor who feels very strongly about community engagement and the purpose of higher education being to contribute to social and economic challenges and the growing of the kind of young people we want to put out into the world. The second point is in South Africa, higher education institutions have been trying to institutionalize sustainable development and community engagement into their systems and practices for over 2 decades. Community engagement in South Africa, in the South African context, is and has the space to contribute to sustainable development. Right, let's have a closer look at community engagement in South Africa. As part of the transformation agenda of higher education in South African universities, They are required to contribute to social and economic development of communities, especially those who were historically disadvantaged, and to prepare students to be socially and civically responsible. So the two purposes of higher education in South Africa. Community engagement was introduced as a core function of higher education for this purpose. Together with teaching and learning and research, community engagement contributes to the developmental role of higher education institutions in South Africa. So the Higher Education Quality Committee defines community engagement as follows: initiatives and processes through which the expertise of the higher education institutions in the areas of teaching and learning and research are applied to address issues relevant to its community. Community engagement typically finds expression in a variety of forms, ranging from informal and relatively unstructured activities to formal and structured academic programs addressed at particular community needs. So what you will begin to see here is community engagement doesn't stand and cannot stand alone. The purpose is to embed it into teaching and learning and into research. Taking a closer look at Rhodes University and RUS being the Community Engagement Division. So Rhodes is a relatively small institution, as Joe said, located in semi-rural town of Makanda in the Eastern Cape, one of the poorest provinces in our country. It's the only research-intensive university located outside a major urban area in South Africa, which means it's quite a unique position to be in. It's a residential university with over 50% of our students staying in residence. And Makanda is a microcosm of South Africa's problems of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. So these characteristics that I've mentioned has a significant implication for the way Rhodes's mandate as a research-intensive institution is being fulfilled and will continue to be fulfilled. So our division was established in 2008 and has over the years built a collaborative community university partnerships guided by relevant theoretical and philosophical frameworks, values, and principles. Now we're going to take a closer look at the framework that we use in the community engagement division. And I'll just make 2 points around this. The first is the co-generation of knowledge between community partners and Rhodes. The ecosystem's theoretical perspective and the philosophy of Ubuntu have guided us in the development of a framework for community engagement. And that incorporates the Rhodes University Institutional Development Plan, the National Development Plan, and the SDGs. So bringing them all together in a coherent way. And I'll share with you that wheel shortly. Second point I want to make under our framework is that it demonstrates the interdependent relationship between the institution, the local community, the broader society, and the global community, between teaching, learning, research, and community engagement, and between the rational, emotional, and spiritual fields of knowledge, and between the social, economic, cultural, and other dimensions of community. So you can see the ecosystems theory means we don't look at problems separately, but as integrally related. Just to share with you some of the theories and philosophy that underpin the community engagement work. The first is the ecosystems theory. It acknowledges the interconnectedness and interrelatedness of human and social needs and problems, which cannot be perceived and addressed in an isolated and fragmented way. So it provides a framework for multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral approaches to community engagement and development. And then its essence is in the integration and systemization of knowledge about the interrelationships of people with each other and with their environments. Other guiding theories include transformative learning And this is a profound shift in individual and collective consciousness that impacts on our thinking and actions, from individualism and selfishness towards selflessness and compassion and a concern for others and the public good. It requires an understanding of the interdependency and the interconnectedness of all forms of life. So transformative learning, ethics of care, social innovation, or other theories that support this ecosystem theory that I have mentioned. And to touch on those, social innovation enhances the creativity of humans in the process of being for oneself and the collective good. It takes place in daily life, in social relationships and behavior, and in the home, and is therefore not trapped by any standard measures of economic activity. It aims to create social value for the wider community rather than for personal profit. And then another one of the theories is the healing and development, an integral part of community development. Individual and community transformations go hand in hand. Healing ourselves, our communities, societies, and the earth depends on the capacity to understand ourselves, who we are as human beings, and how we grow and develop as individuals and community. There's the ethics of care that I've mentioned, a really important theory. Caring is an innate and should form the core of educational systems, Students encouraged to demonstrate care towards others associated with connection and relationships, and the component of socially responsible behavior and attitude. The ethics of care is a really critical statement. It moves students away from competitiveness and selfishness to teamwork. And one of the discussions the VC often has is, what kind of students do we want to grow at Rhodes University? Is it just about letting them leave here with a good degree that will give them access to a good job? Or is it much more than that? Is it about cultivating humanity? Is it about growing the kind of young people that can lead the reimagination of a new society, which is more equal and fair? And then the philosophy of Ubuntu highlights the interconnectedness and interdependence of all human beings. The individual is not an isolated being, but it lives in an interdependent relationship with others. Ubuntu is used in communities as an estimate to measure humanness. Some of the attributes of Ubuntu are respect for any human being, for human dignity, and for human life, collective sharing, love, humility, solidarity, caring, hospitality, interdependence, and communalism. And these theories are important for guiding the work of RUS. And it underpins the SDGs, care for people, and the collective prosperity. Now I'm going to share with you our strategic planning process and how we use the SDGs to inform our way forward. Before I explain that to you, let me just mention the first 2 points that I have on the screen. The first is that at Rhodes, community engagement is manifested in 3 forms. That's service learning, which is the credit-bearing form of community engagement as part of a course. Engaged research, so that's research done in participatory ways, working with people rather than for people. And then volunteerism. We pride ourselves on a lot of volunteer programs, an important part of the student experience at Rhodes. And then also in line with our Rhodes vision and mission. And community engagement is largely integrated with teaching and research. I say largely because we still have a lot of work to do, but a lot as has happened already. The second point is one you've heard me mention already in this webinar around building partnerships. Relationships with community members and community organization form the foundation of all the work that we do. We believe without relationships, without trust and warmth, human development doesn't happen. So I'll share with you now our strategic planning process. A few years back, we put 3 days aside to do our planning process as a division. And we started by asking ourselves the question, so if higher education is about the public good, how does Rhodes engage with and respond to the needs of society? Not just engage with, how do they respond to the needs of society? And how does Rhodes exercise its social responsibility and help students to exercise their social responsibility? So what we did is we started with the local and the national and the global priorities, and we unpacked them thoroughly. So that is our Rhodes Institutional Plan, the National Development Plan, and then the global SDGs, the 17 global SDGs. And we spent 2 days on this exercise, just unpacking each one and finding themes and synergies. And the result was quite a complex but very helpful matrix, 3 pages of the matrix, and from this, we developed what we call the Rhodes SDG wheel, which I'll show you shortly. And it's then become a framework around which we organize our activities and we capture the work in the university. So let's have a look at what that looks like. That's what it looks like. So you can see on the left with the documents that we used and look for themes and synergies. And the three main themes came around the planet, places, and people. So sustainability, collaboration, and well-being in the center. And then you can see as it goes out, it brings in the SDGs, the national development priorities, and our Rhodes RDP. I'll just pause while you have a look at it. And then I'm going to take you through each of these segments. So if you look at the yellow, that speaks to people, that's well-being, education, healthy living, quality of life. The blue speaks to places and collaboration, responsive institutions, social cohesion, justice. And then the green is the planets, the sustainability, the built environment, climate change, and the work being done in that area. So I'm just going to give you 1 or 2 examples of some of the work. So this is the people, the well-being part. You'll see the SDG it speaks to. That touches on others, so it's not exclusively those. SDG 1 to 6, and of course 17 being the partnership one. And then I've spoken to it in the nexus between teaching, research, and community engagement, or between teaching and community engagement, or between research and community engagement. So for this one, let me use the example of the Vice Chancellor's Education Initiative, which is the top one. Now, that is an education program that was initiated by the Vice Chancellor when he repositioned the university, saying we are not only geographically located in the city, but we are of and for the city. And one of his promises to the community was quality education for all young people in the city. So this project was born out of that. It's also called the Pathways of Education because it's a multi-stakeholder approach from early childhood all the way through to post-schooling, tracking all young people through the process and various interventions where there are gaps and problems identified. Obviously, literacy is one of those in the early years, nutrition, etc., etc. And then obviously a lot of programs at the top end so that young people can get reasonable grade 12 marks, which allows them access into university. The teaching component of this is that, for example, in one of the programs, it's got multi-programs. So one of the programs is 9/10, which I'll share with you a little more in depth in a moment, has a teaching component to it. Students are trained in an accredited online short course before they're placed in projects, and they work with as mentors to grade 12 pupils. So you have a teaching component. We also have a research component to this, and that's multidisciplinary across the university. We have 10 people working on this project in the research space. So that gives it a really lovely coherence between teaching, research, and community engagement, and the one informs the other. I'll mention just one more here. If you have a look down the list, under the teaching and community engagement is service learning. Now that's a form of community engagement where you get community engagement embedded in a short course. That's generally where you want to achieve the learning outcomes of students, and you match it with an issue in the community. And it's mutually beneficial because the student achieves the learning outcomes, but some change happens in the community. So what this program is the journalism third years. They work with schools, and we have huge challenges in our schools because we have a teacher shortage, and often we have resource shortage, so they don't have textbooks. So what these journalism students did was they took SD cards, because everybody's got a little phone or somewhere to put an SD card in, and they loaded SD cards with carefully researched content that would help grade 12s through the year. And then once they've loaded it particular to every student's subjects, they go and orientate the students and they hand them over, and then they do all the journalism work around that. They tell the stories, they write articles, etc. And this year they gave 520 fully loaded SD cards to young people, which will make a huge difference. So that gives you an idea. That service learning program speaks to SD goals, mainly 4, the education goal, but also 17, because it's not a little program in isolation. It partnered with the VC's education initiative and the schools. So as we always say, rather than set up a lot of little programs, hook onto a moving train and you strengthen that movement, and ultimately it results in more impact. So that shows you the one part. Let's go to the planet and the sustainability, SDG 6 to 15, a number of SDGs this speaks to, and of course 17, which is the partnership. And I gave you some examples of some of the work. If you look at the Tsikama project, third bullet down, in the nexus of teaching, research and community engagement, this is an amazing project that is happening in partnership with the Parks Board, and there's been some good research. But the interesting element of this has been that they've adopted the methodology of digital storytelling for healing. And so our team went down and ran 3-day workshops with the community. They produced a digital story. It's a story about their own lives as part of their healing process. It was incredibly powerful. So gives you an idea of some work in that way. We've got some very strong departments and division, the Environmental Learning Research Center. They have a number of extraordinary projects in the space. So we're very strong in the planet and sustainability area. And then the last one, which is places and collaboration. I think I'll just mention the first one here. This speaks to SDG goal 10, 16, and 17. These shared spaces what we were trying to do a number of years back was trying to make the university more porous. So to get the community coming onto campus, to get our academics moving off campus and into the community. And so what we started was to set up third spaces, spaces that the community could access and academics could access, start to build relationships and find synergies in the work they were doing. The first one we set up was the Joza Youth Hub, which is an education space, so it speaks to SDG 4, and it has 5 or 6 NGOs working in the space, and instead of the competition that existed before, they're working beautifully and collaboratively, and they all target various things, so there's no duplication in the schools anymore. They're working far more collaboratively. The third space we set up was the Assumption Development Center in partnerships with Assumption Sisters. And this hub targets economic development. So it's for post-schooling and addressing poverty and unemployment in the community. And there's really nice research teaching that happens out of those spaces and community engagement. So the question of what are we doing with the wheel that I've just shown you? This is only the beginning, so this work is in progress still, but I'll give you an idea of its early impact. So it helps us to focus our interventions and ensure impact. It helps identify individuals, organizations, and groups. So with that matrix, we had a look at each of those sections to say who's working in this space. So for example, we'd look at who's working in inclusive governance, and we'd map out everybody working in that space. And then we would check that they all knew about each other, because inevitably it wasn't. And they were so excited to learn that other people, NGOs, CBOs, individuals, researchers, so they started to build nice communities of practice in those spaces, which made it very helpful. The wheel has helped us to start to give us a common language across the university. We're becoming much more familiar with the SDGs. And to give meaning to our own IDP Goal 7, which is universities exist for the public good, we've been encouraging researchers to work in more participatory ways with rather than for communities, and encouraging researchers to aim for impact rather than just the number of outputs. Because I'm not sure how it works in other countries, but in South Africa, you are rewarded for the number of outputs rather than the impact of the outputs. The wheel has also encouraged some lecturers to build in a service learning component in their courses. It's also strengthened the student experience. Our students get out into the broader community. They get opportunities to understand the context, to be critical of why it's like that, and to locate themselves in it, to see how they can be change agents. It's helped us to organize and monitor our work. It's helped us to understand and question the notion of sustainability in relation to our city's context. We have infrastructure and service delivery is failing. So what is the response of our university? So this SDG wheel will continue to be revised in relation to the Makanda context, and then also at a broader level, but it's a work in progress. We certainly haven't mastered it in any way yet. Lots still to be done. This is the project I said I would stop and use as a quick example of the nexus between teaching, research, and community engagement. I'm not going to spend much time because I've already mentioned it to you. It's a matric mentoring program. We train Rhodes volunteers in an accredited short course. They then get given two matric pupils. That's the last year of our schooling program. And they mentor them over 9 sessions in the year. And it's quite amazing how working collectively has resulted in impact. At the end of each year, we reconceptualize the program. It's now 6 years down the line, and we're seeing amazing results. So a good measure of that is the grade 12 marks from last year. So the final year of schooling from last year. Our city was one of the worst 4 performing cities 4 years ago. And last year, we were the best performing city in the province. So we've managed to go from last to first in the five years of the program's been running 6 years. And the results were really pleasing. To give you some stats there, which will give you an idea of how using the student capital of our student body together with good expertise that we've sought has resulted in good results. The public school average of our public schools was 80% last year. That was 14% higher than the provincial average and 4% higher than the national average, which we're really pleased about. Out of this cohort, there were 89 bachelor passes, which are passes which allow you into university. So 67% of the bachelor passes last year are young people which have now entered and registered at Rhodes. So that helps with the access to higher education. One of the schools that we worked with performed extraordinarily well. They got an 87% pass rate, and they got 46 bachelor passes, which is double what they ever had. And that was in Sika. And in another school, Kutliso Daniels only joined us at the beginning of last year in a bad year with COVID, but they managed to go from 50% to 77% pass rate, from 1 bachelor to 10 bachelors. And this is the program that we were really proud and very humbled to win the prestigious Global Citizenship Award last week, the Mac Janet Award from the Tower Network. So we were really thrilled about that. Right, onto the final lap, some challenges. Well, the devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic would have reversed any progress made by countries in the areas of poverty, inequality, and in unemployment. This SDG, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the 2020 report states that COVID-19 is negatively affecting several goals, particularly SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, SDG 3, good health and well-being, and SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, and SDG 10, the reduction of inequalities. In other areas, the ultimate effects of the pandemic remain a bit unclear, so I can't report on that. Another key finding in the challenges of the 2020 report is that negative spillover effects generated by high-income countries are undermining other countries' ability to reach the SDGs. Another point, such transboundary impacts are transmitted through trade, consumption patterns, deforestation, and other dynamics. And some of these factors increase the likelihood of future pandemics. In South Africa, we've got to address the pandemic of corruption together with the pandemic of poverty and inequality. COVID-19 is certainly not the only pandemic. Challenges to higher education. Every higher education institution would have experienced and will experience challenges to implementing SDGs to varying degrees through teaching, research, and community engagement prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, has impacted on all higher education institutions globally, and I'm sure all of you have felt that. The word negative may be used to describe this impact, but the pandemic has also provided higher educations globally with the opportunity to ask a number of pertinent and profound questions about the purpose of higher education and higher education institutions. The interconnectedness of the local, national, and global spaces has shown that we cannot function in silos. Collaboration and cooperation between all relevant stakeholders is very critical to local, national, and global recovery from the pandemic, and to build a humanity that emphasizes the attributes of Ubuntu. And then in closing, what do we do to effect transformation? And that is particularly relevant in our context in South Africa, with the past and the painful past that we have had. So just 3 points here. To revisit the purpose of higher education on national and global levels. Higher education institutions must educate students, the generation, both for life and for living. So that's about generating, growing the kind of young people that can be transformative leaders. We need to educate young people for uncertainty and change, because traditionally we've educated them for certainty. They've gone to high school to get good marks, to go to university. They go to university to get good marks, to get a job. And we've made that paradigm shift away from that economistic perspective to a much more holistic perspective, to say we have to educate young people for life and for living. Yes, a job is important, but we also need to go beyond that. A key emphasis of successful implementation of the SDGs through community engagement and its nexus with teaching and research is about building authentic community-university partnership relationships, breaking that old ivory tower perception of universities. And then the last thing is, at an institutional level, an institution-wide approach and plan to implement and monitor the SDGs through our teaching, research, and community engagement. Thank you all very much for being patient and for listening to me. Jo, I'm done.
Thank you very much, Di. You've really given us a sense of the immense potential of community engagement to effect the SDGs in higher education, to have an influence on the transformation of both society and the university. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to invite participants to let us know whether they have any comments or questions. And you do that by typing an M in the chat. And then I will give you an opportunity to ask your question or make your comment. But just to say, from Elaine Ward, she says, thank you very much, Diana. Your work and frameworks for greater impact are extremely helpful. Thank you. Di, I wonder if I can ask you to just stop sharing.
Right, Jo, let me just look where that is.
And while you're doing that, Krisanti Kaji from Frederick University in Cyprus says she's grateful that you've shared with everybody your experience. Thank you very much. Are you struggling to unshare?
I'm struggling to find the button to unshare. Can you do it from your side or not, Jo?
I'm not 100%.
Oh, hang on, sorry. I found it. I was just covering it with the other face.
Great.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you very much. There's a question from Bala. Bala, take the mic.
Hi, Di, thank you very much. It's a very, very interesting talk. I enjoyed it very much. Just if you could tell us, when did this start? You know, this program. When did it start? And secondly, how does the institution evaluate the progress, given the broad spectrum and the challenges the community in South Africa faces? And thirdly, I heard a conversation yesterday from members of the African Union Parliament, very, very seasoned members, and one of the issues that was raised was the fact that higher education institutions in South Africa have not, well, the word is decolonialized, And you know, I think that is really top of the agenda for many people in South Africa and Africa. And the point was that unless we do it, that was a comment made, that we're not going to generate the kind of leadership that we require in this country. So your comments on those, please.
So we started on by embedding the SDGs into our work 4 years ago. So we developed that matrix, and we unpacked, you know, the SDGs, the National Development Plan, and our own IDP. And so it's been a 4-year journey, but it's a slow journey. In that we as a division are still coming to terms with, you know, how we use them smartly. Community engagement, I think, is an emerging discipline. So we've spent a lot of time building the theoretical base for it. You know, there's nothing that's good that comes quickly or easily. People have got to fight it and grapple with it. And that's why I introduced myself as in just the way I did, because it's very much a work in progress. And the language is evolving, and we are finding that more and more academics are buying into community engagement. The younger academics find it easier in many cases to understand, you know, what an incredible platform it is for transforming the way you teach and the way you research and the way you are as a human being. But that is a slow process. So I think I speak to your third point of the decolonization of universities and how universities are struggling with that change. It so depends, as I said in one of my slides, on the leadership. And we are the envy of many universities because we have a vice chancellor, Dr. Sizwe Mabizela, who really understands it from a very deep level. And he speaks a lot about the kind of young people that we need to grow. And he always says of those that emerge out of some sort of community engagement work, he says they are qualitatively different young people to many of the others. So, yeah, I think, you know, the community engagement has been introduced. It's got traction in various degrees at universities, a lot dependent on its leadership and how much, you know, they speak to it at that level. So, yeah, I think it's, as I said, it's a journey, but we do get the sense that every year we are stronger than the year before. In how universities evaluate, some have amazing systems. We still, you know, work program to program. We have 5 citizenship programs that run out of our division. And the metrics are really important. And then in terms of service learning and engaged research, we don't evaluate that. Divisions do their own work in the quality space. What we try to do is build the databases so we know exactly what people are doing in which areas, so that we can, you know, tell them about each other and keep our finger on it. But our role is not to evaluate them. What we do though is we have a number of support mechanisms which speak to quality. So we offer a short course in service learning, an accredited short course. Our community-based research course will come online soon. All our citizenship courses are accredited online short courses. And we provide a lot of resource support to academics who want to do engaged research or who want to do service learning. I hope that goes some way to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Di. There's a question here from Nicoletta. We haven't got much time left, Di. We've only got 2 minutes. And Nicoletta wants to know how people incorporate the SDGs into their teaching, or perhaps also community engagement into their teaching and their syllabus. And is there a particular way, or does everyone just decide for themselves? So that's a question. And then once you've answered that, I'm just going to give Saloshni an opportunity to ask her question, and then we've got to wrap up because we said we'd finish by 3:30.
So it's up to every individual lecturer, whether they incorporate service learning or not. No one is mandated to do that. We offer the support of helping them find a good match of a partner. We'll help them recurriculate. And the university also gives financial resources to cover any costs. But there's no compulsory, which I think is really good, because I think many of the communities we choose to work in are vulnerable. So if people have to do something, they don't do it with the same heart than if they choose to do something. And so we've been able to grow community engagement at Rhodes in a voluntary way. You do engaged research or you do service learning by choice, and we're up to 50% of our student body now does some form of engagement before they leave this university, and that's growing every day.
Thank you very much, Di. Saloshni, do you want to ask your question or make a comment?
Thank you, Joanne. I've had a comment. I've just come off the IIS's Global Summit, where Africa and South Africa were asked to present their success in implementing the SDGs. And the Africa report, what it reflected was that there was limited commitment and effort, and as well as an isolated or fragmented approach to implementing the SDGs, and not a whole systems perspective. So I found this presentation absolutely enjoyable and very reassuring that there's such excellent effort in terms of embedding the SDGs. We found that the gaps were in institutional frameworks and policy processes that did not articulate the SDG. They were implemented in isolated spaces, so possibly via community engagement and via student affairs and services. But what was absent was the whole system perspective and understanding community engagement both within and external to the institution. And one of the recommendations was for higher education Africa, South Africa, to find a way to embed the SDGs within their strategic plans via curriculum transformation, service learning, community engagement, teaching and learning. So I think your presentation would have been absolutely wonderful for the Global Summit last week. It actually shows an excellent effort at embedding and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Saloshni. Joe, are you still there? Did you want me to respond to that?
Oh, right.
I think it's necessary.
Yes, please, if you feel you want to. Otherwise, it is now 15:32. And we have to draw this to a close, but perhaps you want to respond very briefly. And people who need to leave they can just leave the meeting. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Okay, Di?
Yeah, I think Saloshni raises an important point there. And I think this is where the SDGs can be the hook to hang it on. You can use it as a framework, as a university, to report into in a very coherent way. So yeah, I think it's just that paradigm shift away from that compartmentalized way we used to think a lot about making sense of the world to a more systemic way. So yeah, I think she makes a really important point, and thank you for that, Sularshni.
Right. Thank you very much, Di. Vasilios, do you want to say something before we close this meeting? Vasilios, can you please unmute? Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can unmute him.
Το μικρόφωνο σου, Βασίλη. Το μικρόφωνο σου είναι κλειστό.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Diana, for this interesting presentation. It was very clear and very informative and very detailed. And I think that is a challenge for the PUAT projects, how to integrate the Rhodes initiatives into the course curricula. You mentioned that it's a voluntary basis, but at the same time, you stressed that it's been highly integrated into teaching, learning, and research. So in a way, curriculum is absent from these domains. So I think that it's very important, since it's a policy for the university, to be also a policy for developing a curricula which will be, in line with the Rhodes strategy. Thank you.
Di, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I didn't focus at all on curricula, and I really could have, but there was just so much to try and paint the kind of picture I was, trying from the global down to the local level. But curriculum is an important part of it, and we have support within our division, for recurriculating or creating a component of the course to be a service learning component. So, with a good reflective element to it. So, that is something we felt very strongly about, is that the theory of community engagement, whether in the volunteer space, in the service learning space, or in the engaged research space, must be well articulated. But, be happy if one of our staff, who's Dr. Joe Bezerra, could maybe share a session on just that. We also have Mandy Flengwa in Churtle, who does wonderful work in that space. So I think they might be able to be quite useful for sharing too in the team, Vasilios. But thank you for that comment.
Thank you.
All right, yeah, so just to say that service learning is a way of embedding, in this case, it would be sustainable development goals into the curriculum. And also that Rhodes University has several staff development projects or programs where curriculum development is a focus, like our postgraduate diploma in higher education, and our short course on curriculum assessment and teaching and learning. And we talk in those about integrating various aspects of the student experience, like, for example, the SDGs into the curriculum. So thank you very much, colleagues, for joining us for this very interesting webinar. Thank you, Di, for doing this and for showcasing the really amazing work that you do and that the lecturers and students of Rhodes University do. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I'm now going to end this webinar and thank you again for attending.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Priscilla. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.